The residents of West 42nd Street had seen police raids, ambulance sirens, and street fights. But they had never seen silence like this. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of absolute power. At 7 a.m. the sun struggled to pierce the grey winter clouds, but the street below was gleaming. 500 matte black Mercedes G-Wagons and armoured Cadillac Escalades had gridlocked the entire block. Engines idled with a low, threatening rumble. Men in bespoke Italian suits stood by the doors, waiting. They weren't looking for a criminal. They were looking for the waitress in apartment 4B, who had no idea she had just saved the devil himself. The wind in Chicago didn't just blow, it cut. It was a living thing, screaming down the alleyways of the South Side, rattling the frosted windows of Sal's all-night diner. Eleanor Vance shivered as she wiped down the counter for the 100th time. The clock on the wall buzzed loudly, reading 2:45 a.m. The storm of the decade had buried the city under 2 feet of snow, and the streets were dead. Even the usual drunks and insomniacs had stayed home. "Go home, Elle," Sal grunted from the kitchen, scraping the grill. "Nobody's coming in this weather. Not unless they got a death wish." Elena nodded, untying her grease-stained apron. "Thanks, Sal. I need to get home to feed Barnaby anyway." Barnaby was a one-eyed cat she'd inherited from a neighbor who skipped town, and currently he was the only male in her life who didn't disappoint her. She pulled on her thrift store puffer jacket, wrapped a scarf 3 times around her neck, and pushed out the back door into the alley. The cold hit her like a physical slap. The snow was blinding, swirling in chaotic vortexes under the flickering yellow light of the street lamp. She kept her head down, clutching her purse, trudging towards the bus stop. She hoped the 55 bus was still running. If not, it was a 40-minute walk to her studio apartment, a walk that in these temperatures could be dangerous. She made it 3 steps past the overflowing dumpster when she saw the boot. It was a black leather boot. Not the cheap work boots the construction guys wore. This was sleek, polished, expensive leather, now scuffed and buried in a drift. Elena froze, her breath hitched in her throat. Common sense screamed at her to run. This was Chicago at 3 a.m. Nothing good happened in alleys. But Eleanor Vance had a fatal flaw. She couldn't walk away from a wounded thing. She stepped closer, the snow crunching loudly. A man was slumped against the brick wall, half buried in the white powder. He was unconscious. The snow around him wasn't white. It was a deep, horrifying crimson. He was wearing a suit, charcoal grey, tailored, the kind of fabric that cost more than Eleanor made in a year. But the suit was ruined, soaked through on the right side of his abdomen. "Hey," she whispered, her voice lost in the wind. "Sir?" She knelt. He was huge, broad-shouldered, his face pale as marble. Dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat, despite the freezing cold. He looked like a fallen statue, something carved and brutal. She reached out, her fingers trembling, to check for a pulse at his neck. His eyes snapped open. They were the color of steel, cold and sharp. Before she could blink, his hand shot out and gripped her wrist. The strength in his grip was terrifying, bruising. "No, hospitals," he rasped. His voice was wet, a ragged growl. "No, cops!" "You're bleeding to death," Elena stammered, staring at the gun holstered under his open jacket. It was a custom Beretta, silver with an engraving she couldn't make out. "You need a doctor." "I said no," he hissed, his eyes rolling back slightly before focusing on her again with sheer willpower. "Take me. Somewhere safe. Or leave me to die." Elena looked at the blood pooling under him. If she left him, he would be a frozen corpse by sunrise. If she called the cops, the gun suggested things would get complicated, and he clearly didn't want them. "I'm going to regret this," she muttered. "I am going to regret this so much." "Can you stand?" she asked, louder. He gritted his teeth, a vein popping in his temple. "Help me." She hooked her arm under his good side. He was heavy, dead weight of muscle and bone. With a groan of effort that strained her back, she heaved him up. He stumbled, nearly dragging her down into the slush, but regained his footing. "My car is gone," he mumbled, delirium setting in. "Ambush! Save your breath," Elena ordered, panic rising in her chest. "My apartment is 2 blocks away. Don't you dare die on me, you hear? I don't want to explain a dead body to my landlord. He already hates the cat." The walk was a nightmare. Every step was a battle against the wind and his fading consciousness. He leaned on her heavily, his blood soaking into the side of her puffer jacket. By the time they reached her building, a crumbling brick walk-up with a broken buzzer, Elena was sweating despite the sub-zero temperature. She fumbled for her keys, dragged him into the lobby, and prayed the elevator was working. It wasn't. It never was. "4th floor," she panted. "We have to walk." The stranger didn't answer. He was focusing on putting one foot in front of the other, his breathing sounding like a broken bellows. When she finally kicked her apartment door open and dragged him inside, they both collapsed onto a cheap, rug-covered floor. Barnaby the cat hissed from the top of the refrigerator. Elena scrambled up, locking the door and throwing the deadbolt and the chain. She turned back to the man. He was out cold again, lying in the center of her tiny living room, like a fallen king. She knelt beside him and tore open his expensive shirt. Buttons popped and rolled across the floor. There was a bullet hole just above his hip bone. It was ugly, angry, and oozing. "Okay, Elena," she whispered, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "You watched 3 seasons of Grey's Anatomy. You can do this. Pressure. Clean it. Bandage." She didn't know who he was. She didn't know that the watch on his wrist was a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime, worth $31 million. She didn't know that the men looking for him had just executed 3 federal judges. All she knew was that she needed towels, lots of towels. The apartment smelled of rubbing alcohol and metallic blood. Elena had dragged him onto a sofa, sacrificing her only good blanket. She had cleaned the wound as best she could. Luckily, the bullet seemed to have passed through. There was an exit wound in his back, cleaner than the entry. It had missed the major organs, but he had lost a lot of blood. She sat in the armchair opposite him, holding a baseball bat she kept for protection, watching his chest rise and fall. It was 4:30 a.m. He stirred. A low groan escaped his lips. Elena tightened her grip on the bat. "Stay down. You'll rip the stitches." She had used a sewing kit. It was barbaric, but it was all she had. She had sterilized the needle with vodka and fire. The stranger opened his eyes. The fog was gone. The delirium had been replaced by a focused, predatory clarity. He scanned the room in seconds, the peeling wallpaper, the radiator hissing in the corner, the cat staring at him, and finally, the woman with the baseball bat. He tried to sit up, wincing sharply, his hand flying to his side. He felt the bandages. "You stitched me," he stated. It wasn't a question. "You wouldn't let me call an ambulance," Elena said, her voice steady, despite her fear. "And you were bleeding out on my rug. I improvised." He looked at her then. Really looked at her. In the dim light of the apartment, Elena looked exhausted. Her brown hair was a mess, dark circles under her eyes, wearing an oversized t-shirt and sweatpants. "Who are you?" he asked. "Elena, I'm a waitress. Who are you? And don't tell me John Smith." He hesitated. A shadow passed over his face. "Lorenzo. Just Lorenzo. For now." He looked at the glass of water on the table. He tried to reach for it, but pain spasmed through him. Elena sighed, put down the bat and walked over. She held the glass to his lips. He drank greedily, his eyes never leaving hers. His hand came up to steady the glass, and his fingers brushed hers. His skin was burning up. "You have a fever," she said, pulling back. "You need antibiotics. Real ones, not the expired stuff I have in the cabinet." "I have people," Lorenzo said, his voice stronger now. "I need a phone. My cell is gone." Elena pointed to a cracked iPhone on the coffee table. "Be my guest, but if you call someone to come kill me, I swear I'll hit you with the bat." A ghost of a smile touched Lorenzo's lips. It transformed his face, making him look less like a monster and more like a man. "You have my word, Elena. No harm will come to you. You saved my life." He picked up the phone. He didn't scroll through contacts. He dialed a number from memory. He spoke in Italian, rapid, harsh, commanding Italian. Elena didn't speak the language, but she understood the tone. He wasn't asking for help. He was issuing orders. He sounded like a general rallying an army. "Si vivo, tradimento, voglio tutti, tutti." He hung up and deleted the call log. "They are coming," he said. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the blizzard outside. "Who is coming?" "My family." "Are they the good guys or the bad guys?" Lorenzo looked at the window, where the snow was finally slowing down. "In my world, Elena, there are no good guys. There are just the ones who survive." He tried to stand, but his legs gave out. Elena caught him. For a moment, they were pressed together, her small frame supporting his massive weight. She could smell him. Beneath the blood and antiseptic, he smelled of expensive cologne, tobacco, and cold air. "Lie back down," she ordered softly. "You can't leave yet." "I am dangerous to be around," he murmured, though he allowed her to guide him back to the sofa. "The men who did this, they are looking for me. If they find me here—" "Then I guess we better hope your family gets here first," Elena said. She went to the kitchen and wetted a cloth. She returned and placed it on his forehead. Lorenzo closed his eyes. He had been shot, stabbed, and hunted across 3 continents. He was the Don of the Moretti crime syndicate, the most feared organization on the eastern seaboard. He slept in a fortress guarded by 30 men. But strangely, lying on this lumpy sofa in a drafty apartment with a waitress wiping his brow, he felt safer than he had in years. "Why?" he asked, his eyes still closed. "Why what? Why help? You saw the gun." Elena shrugged, sitting back in the armchair. "My mom used to say that nobody is past saving. Besides, it's Christmas Eve tomorrow. Would be bad karma to let you freeze." Lorenzo's eyes opened. He looked at the cheap plastic Christmas tree in the corner, barely 2 feet tall, with a single string of lights. "Christmas," he whispered. "I forgot." "Go to sleep, Lorenzo," she said. "I'll watch the door." And against all his training, against every instinct that told him to stay awake, Lorenzo Moretti slept. Elena woke up with a crick in her neck. Sunlight was streaming through the dirty window, harsh and bright. She panicked. She had fallen asleep in the chair. She looked at the sofa. It was empty. The blanket was folded neatly in a square. The bloody towels were gone. The apartment was silent. "Lorenzo?" she called out. No answer. She stood up, her heart sinking. He had left. Of course he had left. He was a criminal with a gun, and she was just a waitress. He probably stole her rent money on the way out. She walked to the kitchen. On the counter, there was a note written on a napkin. The handwriting was elegant, sharp cursive. "Thank you." That was it. No money. No explanation. Just 2 words. Elena felt a strange pang of disappointment. She crumpled the napkin and threw it in the trash. "Well, Barnaby," she said to the cat, "back to reality." She went to the bathroom to splash water on her face. She needed to get ready for her shift at the diner. Sal would kill her if she was late again. She was brushing her teeth when she heard the noise. It started as a low vibration. The toothbrush rattled against the porcelain sink. The floorboards trembled. It sounded like an earthquake, or a freight train passing directly under the building. Elena spat out the toothpaste and ran to the living room window. She pulled back the curtain and looked down at the street. Her toothbrush fell from her hand. The street below, usually lined with rusted hatchbacks and overflowing trash cans, had been transformed. It was a sea of black steel, SUVs, hundreds of them. They stretched as far as the eye could see, blocking the intersections, lining the sidewalks. They were massive, armored, Military-grade vehicles with tinted windows. Mercedes G-Wagons, Cadillac Escalades, Range Rover Sentinels. They were parked with military precision, bumper to bumper. In the center of the formation, directly in front of her building, sat a Rolls-Royce Phantom, jet black with chrome rims. What in the world? Elena breathed. The neighbors were hanging out of their windows. People on the street had stopped walking, phones out, recording. The silence was eerie. 500 engines idling created a low-frequency hum that vibrated in her chest. Then, in perfect synchronization, the doors of the SUVs opened. Men poured out. It looked like an invasion. There were hundreds of them. They were all dressed in identical black suits, wearing earpieces. They didn't look like street thugs. They looked like a private army. They moved with terrifying discipline, forming a perimeter around the building, facing outward, hands clasped in front of them. They were securing the location. A man stepped out of the Rolls-Royce. He was older, with silver hair and a cane, wearing a suit that probably cost more than the entire building. He looked up, his eyes scanning the windows until they locked onto the 4th floor. He nodded once. 2 men from the Rolls-Royce turned and marched into a building. Elena stumbled back from the window. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. Were they here to kill her? Had Lorenzo sent them to clean up the loose end? She looked for the bat. It was under the sofa. She grabbed it, her hands sweating. She heard heavy footsteps on the stairs, not the usual shuffle of her neighbors. These were hard, purposeful steps. Thud, thud, thud. They stopped outside her door. Elena held her breath. She raised the bat. A sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the apartment. "Miss Vance?" A deep voice called out. "Open the door, please!" "Go away!" Elena yelled, her voice cracking. "I'm calling the police!" "We have already spoken to the police commissioner, Miss Vance. He sends his regards. Please open the door. We are not here to harm you." Elena hesitated. If they wanted to kill her, they wouldn't knock. They would just kick the door down. The lock on her door was a joke. A stiff breeze could open it. She lowered the bat slightly. She unlocked the deadbolt, leaving the chain on, and cracked the door open. A wall of a man stood there. He was wearing sunglasses, even in the dim hallway. Behind him stood the older man, with the silver hair. "Miss Elena Vance?" the older man asked. His voice was smooth, cultured. "Yes?" The older man bowed. It wasn't a mocking bow. It was a bow of deep, genuine respect. "My name is Vittorio. I am the consigliere to the Moretti family. I believe you are the woman who saved the Capo Dei Capi." "The what?" "The boss of bosses," Vittorio clarified. "Lorenzo Moretti." Elena blinked. "The guy with the bullet hole?" Vittorio smiled tightly. "Precisely. Mr. Moretti had to leave urgently to attend to family business. But he gave strict instructions regarding you." "Instructions?" "He said you sheltered him when he was vulnerable. You did not ask for money. You did not call the authorities. You saved his life." Vittorio snapped his fingers. The large man beside him stepped forward, holding a velvet box. He opened it. Inside sat a key. It was a heavy, old-fashioned iron key with a diamond-encrusted head. "What is this?" Elena asked. "Pack a bag, Miss Vance," Vittorio said. "You can leave the cat. We have a specialized carrier for him downstairs." "Pack a bag? Where am I going?" "Mr. Moretti does not believe this neighborhood is safe for you anymore. Not after the events of last night. His enemies are thorough. If they find out you helped him, they will come for you." Elena gripped the doorframe. "So I'm a prisoner?" "No," Vittorio shook his head. "You are a guest, a very, very important guest." He gestured towards the window, towards the army of 500 SUVs waiting in the snow. "The convoy is for you, Miss Vance. Mr. Moretti said that a queen should not travel in a taxi." Elena looked at the man, then at the key, then back at her shabby apartment. "A queen!" she squeaked. "Please, Miss Vance. We must move. The city is unstable. The wolf is awake, and he has started the hunt. He wants you by his side before the war begins." Elena Vance, the waitress who had $40 in her bank account and a one-eyed cat, looked at the consigliere. She realized her life, the quiet, struggling life she knew, was over. She had invited the devil in, and now he was taking her to hell. Or heaven. She couldn't tell which yet. She closed the door, took a deep breath, and grabbed her bag. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's go." The ride out of the city was surreal. Elena sat in the back of the Rolls-Royce Phantom, sinking into Connolly leather seats, soft as butter. The silence inside the car was absolute, save for the muffled hum of the V12 engine. Outside the tinted windows, Chicago was a blur of snow and traffic, but the traffic parted for them. The lead SUVs, lights flashing blue and red, illegally, she assumed, cleared a path. Behind her, the endless column of black vehicles followed like a metallic tail. She looked down at Barnaby. Her one-eyed alley cat was currently curled up in a Louis Vuitton pet carrier that Vittorio had placed on the seat next to her. Barnaby looked more comfortable with the sudden change in fortune than she did. "Where are we going, exactly?" Elena asked. Her voice sounded small in the cavernous interior of the car. Vittorio, sitting in the front passenger seat, half-turned. "The Moretti estate. It lies 40 miles north of the city, near Lake Forest. It is secure." "Secure from what? You still haven't told me who shot him." Vittorio's expression darkened. "A rival faction, the Calabrese family. They have been encroaching on our territory for months. But the attack last night, it was too precise. They knew his route. They knew his security detail was minimal. It was an inside job." Elena felt a knot form in her stomach. "And by helping him, I'm now involved in a mob war." "You were involved the moment you saw him in that alley, Miss Vance. Now you're simply on the winning side." An hour later, they left the highway for winding country roads lined with snow-heavy pines. They approached a massive wrought-iron gate set into a 12-foot stone wall topped with razor wire and security cameras. The gate was flanked by guard towers. Men with assault rifles stood visible on the catwalks. The gates swung open slowly, admitting the lead vehicles. The estate was not a house, it was a citadel. It was a sprawling mansion, built of grey stone and glass, modern yet imposing, sitting on a cliff overlooking the frozen expanse of Lake Michigan. The driveway was heated, melting the snow instantly. The convoy stopped in the massive circular courtyard. The car door was opened for her by a guard who looked like he could bench press a small car. Vittorio led her up the grand steps to the massive oak double doors. They opened before they even reached them. The foyer was the size of her entire apartment building. A dual marble staircase swept up to a second-floor balcony. A chandelier the size of a Volkswagen hung from the domed ceiling. And standing in the center of the foyer, waiting for her, was Lorenzo Moretti. He looked nothing like the dying man in the snow. He was impeccably dressed in a navy three-piece suit that fit his broad frame perfectly. He was freshly shaved, his dark hair slicked back. Only a slight stiffness in his posture hinted at the bullet wound in his side. His presence filled the enormous room. He radiated raw, unchecked power. When he looked at her, Elena felt like she was the only person in the world. He walked toward her, his shoes clicking sharply on the marble floor. He stopped a foot away. "Elena," he said. His voice was deep, a low rumble that vibrated through her. "Welcome home." "This isn't my home," she said, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. "This is a castle. It is the safest place on earth right now," Lorenzo replied. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was firm, possessive. He raised her hand to his lips, his eyes never leaving hers. It was an old-world gesture, oddly charming and terrifying at the same time. "You look terrible," he said softly, a hint of amusement in his eyes as he took in her worn puffer jacket and jeans. "Thanks. I didn't have time to dress for a kidnapping." Lorenzo actually chuckled. It was a rusty sound, like he hadn't used it often. "Vittorio will show you to your suite. You will find everything you need there. Tonight is Christmas Eve. We are holding a dinner. You will join me." "A dinner? You just got shot yesterday." His face hardened instantly. The amusement vanished, replaced by cold steel. "Exactly. The world thinks I am dead or dying. Tonight, I show my captains and my enemies that the king is very much alive, and I will show them the woman who saved me." He released her hand and turned to walk away. Over his shoulder, he added, "Burn those clothes, Elena. You are a Moretti now. You must look the part." Vittorio led a stunned Elena up the marble stairs to the east wing. He opened a set of double doors, revealing a suite larger than any house she'd ever been in. It had a four-poster bed, a fireplace, a private balcony overlooking the lake, and a bathroom completely lined in white onyx with a sunken tub. Laid out on the massive bed were boxes, dozens of them. Elena walked over and opened the largest one. She gasped. Inside was a gown. It was emerald green silk, sleek and understated, but clearly worth a fortune. The label read Elie Saab. Next to it were boxes containing Jimmy Choo heels, diamond stud earrings, and delicate silk lingerie. "Mr. Moretti had a personal shopper brought in this morning," Vittorio explained from the doorway. "He guessed your size. He is rarely wrong about details." Elena ran her hand over the cool silk of the dress. She thought about her waitressing uniform, smelling of stale coffee and grease. "Why is he doing this?" she whispered. "Because, Miss Vance," Vittorio said gently, "Lorenzo Moretti does not owe debts. He repays them 1,000-fold. And because I suspect he wants to see you in something other than blood-stained sweatpants." Vittorio left, closing the door softly. Elena stood in the center of the opulent room. She walked into the bathroom and looked in the mirror. She saw a tired waitress with split ends and fear in her eyes. She started the bath. She scrubbed the scent of the diner and the fear of the last 24 hours off her skin. She sat in a chair as a severe-looking woman named Marta came in to do her hair and makeup, working in silence. When she finally stood before the full-length mirror 3 hours later, Elena Vane was gone. The woman staring back at her was breathtaking. The emerald gown clung to her curves like a second skin. Her hair was styled in elegant waves over one shoulder. The diamonds sparkled at her ears. She looked regal, expensive, and untouchable. She looked like a Mafia don's wife. She just hoped she could survive the role. The dining hall of the Moretti estate resembled something out of medieval Europe. A 40-foot-long table made of dark, polished walnut dominated the room. A massive stone fireplace roared at one end, casting flickering orange light on the tapestries hanging from the walls, depicting hunting scenes that seemed a little too violent for a dining room. It was Christmas Eve, but there was no joy in the room. There was only tension, thick enough to choke on. 20 men sat around the table. These were the caipos, the captains of the Moretti crime family. They were hard men with scarred faces and expensive suits, men who ran rackets from Boston to Miami. They had all gathered expecting a funeral, or at least a power vacuum. They had heard the rumors. Lorenzo was dead in a snowbank in the south side. When Lorenzo walked in, flanked by Vittorio and 2 armed guards, the silence in the room became absolute. Every man at the table stood up simultaneously. It was a wave of respect. But beneath it, Elena could sense the shock. Lorenzo walked to the head of the table. He looked immaculate, powerful, his eyes scanning the faces of his family, like a wolf sizing up a herd. He didn't sit. He waited. The men remained standing, uneasy. "Sit," Lorenzo commanded softly. They sat. Lorenzo remained standing. He placed one hand on the back of his chair. "I apologize for the late invitation. I had an unexpected engagement last night. It seems the Calabrese family decided to give me an early Christmas present. A bullet." A murmur ran around the table. "They failed," Lorenzo continued, his voice hardening. "Obviously." He stepped aside and gestured to the archway behind him. "But I would not be here if not for divine intervention." Elena stepped into the light. The collective intake of breath in the room was audible. In the emerald gown, With the firelight catching the diamonds in her ears, she looked stunning. But more than that, she was an unknown variable. A stranger introduced into the inner sanctum. 20 pairs of predatory eyes locked onto her. Elena felt her knees tremble, but she remembered Lorenzo's instruction before they entered. Chin up, eyes forward. Show no fear. They are dogs. If they smell fear, they bite. She lifted her chin and walked towards the chair at Lorenzo's right hand, the seat of honor. "This is Elena," Lorenzo announced, placing a hand on her shoulder as she sat. His touch was heavy, a claim of ownership visible to everyone in the room. "She is under my personal protection. Any disrespect shown to her is disrespect shown to me, and the consequence will be the same." He didn't need to spell out the consequence. Dinner was served by silent waiters. The food was exquisite. Truffle risotto, Wagyu beef. But Eleanor barely tasted it. The air was poisonous with suspicion. She watched the men. Some were obsequious, offering forced congratulations to Lorenzo. Others were quiet, their eyes darting between Lorenzo and Elena. Elena focused on the man sitting to Lorenzo's left. His name was Marco. He was Lorenzo's cousin, younger, handsome in a slick way, with restless eyes. He kept smiling at Elena, a smile that didn't reach his cold blue eyes. "So, Elena," Marco said during a lull in conversation, his voice smooth like expensive bourbon, "where did my cousin find such a jewel? Surely not in the gutters where he was dumped." The table went deathly quiet. It was a direct insult, veiled as a compliment. Lorenzo stopped eating. He slowly turned his head toward Marco. "She found me, Marco," Lorenzo said, his voice dangerously quiet, "while others were busy counting my inheritance before my body was cold." Marco's smile faltered. "Just a joke, cousin. We are all relieved you are alive. Truly. We were preparing for the worst." "I'm sure you were," Lorenzo said dryly. The dinner continued, an agonizing ordeal of small talk, masking deep-seated rivalries. Elena felt like she was dining in a tiger pit. When the main course was cleared, waiters brought out champagne glasses. Vittorio stood up at the other end of the table to offer the traditional Christmas toast. "To family," Vittorio began, raising his glass. "To loyalty. And to our Don, Lorenzo Moretti. May his reign be long." "To the Don," the table echoed. They all drank. Elena took a sip of the champagne. It was crisp and cold. Suddenly, a chair scraped violently against the stone floor. A man halfway down the table, capo named Santino, an older man who ran the docks, clutched his throat. His face turned a horrifying shade of purple. He gasped, foam flecked with blood appearing at the corners of his mouth. He collapsed face first into his plate of unfinished Wagyu beef. Chaos erupted. Chairs flipped over as men scrambled back, drawing guns from shoulder holsters. "Poison!" Someone shouted. Lorenzo didn't move. He sat perfectly still, his hand dropping from Elena's shoulder to grip his own champagne flute. He looked at the dead man, then looked around the table at the panicked faces of his captains. "Remain seated," Lorenzo's voice boomed over the commotion, loud enough to crack stone. The guards at the doors raised their assault rifles, aiming them at the table. The capos froze, guns half drawn, caught between their dying comrade and their Don's wrath. Vittorio rushed to the fallen man, checking for a pulse that wasn't there. He looked up at Lorenzo and shook his head. Elena put a hand over her mouth, horrified. She looked at her own glass of champagne. "Don't worry, Elena," Lorenzo said, his voice terrifyingly calm amid the storm. "Yours wasn't poisoned. Neither was mine. Only Santino's." He stood up slowly. The rage radiating from him was palpable now, a physical heat. "Santino was a good earner," Lorenzo said to the room. "But he was weak. The Calabrese got to him last week. Paid him off. He was the one who gave them my route last night." The other captains looked at each other, shock replacing panic. Lorenzo had known. "He thought he was safe here at my table," Lorenzo sneered. "He thought I didn't know." Lorenzo turned his gaze slowly around the table, making eye contact with every single man. "The war has begun," Lorenzo declared. "The Calabrese struck first, but we will strike last. No one leaves this estate until the rats are exterminated. We are on lockdown." He turned to Elena, his eyes burning with an intensity that made her shiver in her silk dress. "Welcome to the family, Elena," he whispered bitterly. "Dinner is over." He took her arm and practically dragged her away from the table, away from the cooling corpse and the smell of fear, leaving his captains locked in the dining room with armed guards watching their every move. The gilded cage had just slammed shut. The estate was plunged into a suffocating darkness. Moments after Lorenzo had dragged Elena into the hallway, the power grid for the entire property died. The crystal chandeliers went black. The security lights failed. The only illumination came from the winter moon casting long, ghostly shadows through the high windows, and the red emergency strobes pulsing silently in the corners of the ceiling. "Stay close to the wall," Lorenzo whispered, his hand gripping Elena's arm tight enough to bruise. He had drawn his gun, the silver Beretta, its barrel gleaming in the moonlight. "I thought this place was a fortress," Elena hissed, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was barefoot, having kicked off her heels to run. "Fortresses aren't supposed to lose power." "They aren't," Lorenzo replied, his voice grim, "unless someone overrides the generator from the inside. Santino was a pawn, Elena, but pawns don't cut power lines. A queen does that." "So who is the queen?" "We are about to find out." They moved through the corridors of the West Wing. The estate, once a symbol of absolute luxury, had transformed into a labyrinth of shadows. Every suit of armor looked like an assassin. Every rustle of the curtains sounded like a footstep. Lorenzo stopped abruptly at a corner, pushing Elena behind him. From the floor below, the sound of shattering glass echoed like an explosion. Then came the gunfire. Automatic weapons, the rat-a-tat-tat tearing through the silence of the night. "They breached the perimeter," Lorenzo cursed. "The gates were opened." "The 500 men," Elena stammered. "Where is your army?" "Confused, blinded, caught in the barracks while the enemy floods the main house. This is a decapitation strike. They are coming for the head." He pulled her into a small study, locking the heavy oak door. He moved a massive mahogany desk in front of it with a grunt of exertion, his wound clearly bothering him. "Listen to me," Lorenzo said, grabbing her shoulders. He looked at her with an intensity that burned. "There is a hidden elevator behind that bookshelf. It goes to the sub-basement. There is a tunnel that leads to the boathouse. Take the boat. Go across the lake. Do not stop." "I'm not leaving," Elena said, surprised by her own stubbornness. "Elena, this isn't a debate. They will kill you just to hurt me." "And if I leave, you die alone in the dark," she shot back. "I saved you once, Lorenzo. I didn't drag you through a blizzard just to let you get shot in your own house." Lorenzo looked at her, torn between fury and admiration. In the red pulse of the emergency lights, she looked fierce, a warrior queen in a torn silk dress. Before he could argue, the handle of the door rattled. Then a heavy boot kicked the wood. Thud. "Lorenzo!" A voice called out from the hallway. It was smooth, mocking. "Open up, cousin. It's cold out here." Lorenzo froze, his eyes narrowed into slits. "Marco!" "I brought friends," Marco shouted. "The Calabrese send their regards. They offered me the city, Lorenzo. All I have to do is hand them your head." Lorenzo stepped back from the door, leveling his gun at the wood. "The elevator," he mouthed to Elena. "Go." "No," she whispered. She remembered the key, the iron key Vittorio had given her. He had said it was for a specialized carrier for the cat, but that made no sense. He had handed it to her with such weight. "Mr. Moretti does not believe this neighborhood is safe. The wolf is awake." She reached into the pocket of her dress. She still had it. She looked at the bookshelf Lorenzo had pointed to. It wasn't just a bookshelf. There was a small, almost invisible keyhole integrated into the molding of the wood. "Lorenzo," she whispered. "The security system. Where is the control? The main server room. Basement level. Why? Because if Marco shut it down, he had to be there. But if I can turn it back on... You can't. It takes 2 keys to override a manual shutdown. I have one. Vittorio has the other. Vittorio is probably dead. I have a key, Elena said, holding up the heavy iron object. Lorenzo stared at it. Vittorio gave you the alpha key? The master override. He looked at her with shock. He trusted you that much. He trusted my survival instinct, she said. If we get the power back on, the automated defenses come online, right? The shutters, the distress beacon for your men outside? Yes. Then we don't go to the boathouse, Elena said, her fear replaced by a cold resolve. We go to the basement. The door splintered. A bullet punched through the wood, embedding itself in the far wall. Cover your ears, Lorenzo roared. He fired 3 shots through the door. A scream of pain echoed from the hallway. Lorenzo grabbed Elena's hand. The basement it is, but we have to move fast. If they catch us on the stairs, it's over. He kicked the secret panel on the bookshelf open, not to use the elevator, but to access the service chute next to it. It was a laundry chute. Ladies first, he grinned, a reckless, dangerous smile returning to his face. Elena looked down the dark metal slide. I hate the Mafia, she muttered and jumped. She slid down 2 stories, landing in a pile of linens in the laundry room. Lorenzo landed beside her a second later, groaning as he hit the pile. They scrambled up. The basement was a maze of pipes and concrete. They could hear footsteps running on the floor above them, dozens of men. The hunt was on. Server room is this way, Lorenzo directed, moving with tactical speed. They reached a steel door at the end of a long corridor. Lorenzo swiped a bloody thumb across a biometric scanner. The pad remained dead. Power is out. Electronic locks are useless. Shoot the hinges, Elena suggested. Reinforced steel. Ricochet would kill us. They were trapped. Footsteps thundered down the stairs at the far end of the hall. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, sweeping toward them. There, a voice shouted. By the server room! Bullets sparked against the concrete walls and pipes around them, sending up hissing jets of steam. Lorenzo shoved Elena into a recessed alcove and returned fire, picking off the lead attacker. We're pinned down, Lorenzo shouted over the gunfire. I have 6 rounds left. Elena looked at the server door. It had a manual override, a keyhole, a large, old-fashioned iron keyhole. Cover me, she screamed. Elena, no. She didn't listen. She sprinted from the alcove, the green silk of her dress flying behind her. She felt the wind of a bullet pass her cheek. She jammed the iron key into the lock and twisted with both hands. The mechanism clanked heavy and loud. The door swung open. Elena fell inside, scrambling on the floor. Lorenzo fired his last few shots, suppressing the attackers just enough to dive in after her and slam the heavy steel door shut. He threw the bolt. Bullets hammered against the steel from the outside like heavy rain. They were safe, for now. The server room was freezing, filled with the hum of backup battery fans. Rows of black towers stood like monoliths. In the center was a console. Do it, Lorenzo gasped, sliding down the wall, clutching his side. Fresh blood was seeping through his suit. Elena ran to the console. It was dead, save for a single blinking red light. She inserted the key into the master slot and turned it. Nothing happened. It needs the biometric, Lorenzo rasped. My hand! Elena ran back to him, helping him stand. He stumbled to the console and slammed his hand onto the scanner. Identity confirmed. Lorenzo Moretti. Override accepted. The room hummed. System reboot, Lorenzo commanded. Activate protocol Jericho. Protocol Jericho? Elena asked. It brings the house down, Lorenzo whispered. Suddenly the lights in the room flickered and blazed to life. Outside the door, the gunfire stopped. Instead, screams began. Protocol Jericho was not an explosion. It was a complete fortress lockdown, combined with automated countermeasures. On the screens in the server room, Elena watched in awe and horror. Steel shutters slammed down over every window and door in the mansion, trapping the attackers inside. High-intensity strobe lights began to flash in the hallways, blinding anyone without protective gear. And then, the internal gas suppression system activated. Sleeping gas pumped rapidly into the corridors. But the real turn of the tide was outside. The floodlights on the roof snapped on, turning night into day. The 500 SUVs parked in the courtyard, previously dormant, roared to life as the loyal drivers, who had been locked out of the main gate system by Marco's hack, saw the manual override clear the path. The gates swung open. The family poured in. "Look!" Lorenzo pointed at the screen showing the main foyer. The gas hadn't reached the foyer yet due to the high ceilings. Marco was there, surrounded by about 20 men in tactical gear. They looked panicked. They were trying to open the front doors, but the steel shutters held fast. They were trapped in the glass cage. "He's trapped," Elena said. "Let's go say hello," Lorenzo said. He reloaded his gun from a cache in the server room. He handed a smaller pistol to Elena. "I don't know how to use this," she said, holding it like it was a poisonous snake. "Point, pull, don't miss, stay behind me." They took the service elevator up to the ground floor. The hallways were filled with sleeping bodies of the Calabrese hitmen, knocked out by the gas. Lorenzo stepped over them without a glance. They reached the double doors of the foyer. Lorenzo kicked them open. The scene inside was a standoff. Marco and his men were clustered in the center of the room. Facing them, aiming through the shuttered windows and from the balcony above, were Lorenzo's loyal guards who had breached the house using gas masks. But Marco had a hostage. He had Vittorio. The older man was on his knees, bruised and bleeding, a gun pressed to his temple by Marco. "Stop!" Marco screamed as Lorenzo entered. "One step and the old man paints the floor." Lorenzo stopped. The room was silent, save for the heavy breathing of the men. "It's over, Marco," Lorenzo said calmly. "The Calabrese have fled. Your men outside are dead or captured. The house is sealed." "I can still kill him," Marco shouted, his eyes wild. "And then I kill you." "You won't," Lorenzo said, taking a step forward. "Because you are a coward, Marco. You poison men at dinner. You let enemies in the back door. You don't have the guts to pull the trigger while looking me in the eye. Try me!" Marco cocked the hammer. Elena saw Marco's finger tighten. She looked at Vittorio. The old man looked resigned, ready to die for his Don. She couldn't let that happen. Elena was standing slightly behind Lorenzo, obscured by his large frame. She looked at the pistol in her hand. Point, pull. But she saw something else. On the floor, near Marco's feet, was the control panel for the underfloor heating system, the cover knocked loose during the fight, and next to it, a fire hose reel on the wall, meant for emergencies. She didn't shoot Marco. She wasn't a killer. She was a waitress. She knew about pressure. She holstered the gun and grabbed the nozzle of the fire hose. She spun the wheel valve fully open. "Hey, Marco!" she yelled. Marco's eyes flicked to her for a split second. "You filthy!" Elena squeezed the handle. A jet of high-pressure water, strong enough to knock a man down, exploded across the room. She didn't aim for Marco's head. She aimed for the marble floor beneath his feet. Slick, polished marble that became an ice rink when wet. The water hit the floor and Marco's legs simultaneously. Marco slipped. It was ungraceful. His feet went out from under him, his arms flailing. The gun fired, but the shot went wide, shattering a vase on the mantelpiece. Vittorio threw himself to the side, rolling away. Marco hit the floor hard. Before he could scramble up, Lorenzo was on him. Lorenzo didn't use his gun. He used his hands. He hauled Marco up by the lapels of his expensive suit and slammed him against the wall. "I gave you a seat at my table," Lorenzo snarled. "I gave you blood." "Lorenzo, wait! We're family," Marco pleaded, blood streaming from his nose. "Not anymore." Lorenzo turned to his guards. "Take him. The basement. I want him to tell us everything he knows about the Calabrese operations before he expires." Two guards dragged a screaming Marco away. The room fell silent. The adrenaline crashed. Lorenzo turned to Vittorio, helping the old man stand. "Are you all right, old friend?" "I am too old for this," Vittorio wheezed, straightening his tie. "But I am alive." Lorenzo turned to Elena. She was standing by the fire hose, dripping wet, her green dress ruined, hair plastered to her face. She was trembling, the shock finally setting in. Lorenzo walked over to her. The guards averted their eyes. He stopped in front of her. He didn't care about the water or the ruined suit. He cupped her face in his hands. "You didn't leave," he said softly. "I couldn't find the exit," she joked weakly, her teeth chattering. "You saved my life. Twice." "Don't make it a habit," she whispered. Lorenzo leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was a kiss of possession, of relief, of adrenaline. It tasted of danger and promise. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. "The war isn't over, Elena," he said. "With Marco gone, the Calabrese will come harder. You can still leave. I can give you money. A new identity in Europe. You can be safe." Elena looked around the shattered foyer. She looked at the loyal men standing guard. She looked at the snowstorm raging outside the windows where the shutters were slowly raising. She thought about her life before. The diner, the loneliness, the cold apartment. She looked at the man standing before her, a monster to the world, but a man who would burn the city down to keep her warm. "I think," Elena said, smoothing back her wet hair and regaining her composure, "that I look better in emerald green than in a waitress apron." Lorenzo smiled. It was a genuine, dangerous smile. "Vittorio," Lorenzo called out without looking away from her. "Yes, boss?" "Get the car. The Queen needs a new dress." Elena took Lorenzo's arm. The doors opened, and outside, the engines of 500 SUVs revved in unison. A salute to the power of the Moretti family and its new matriarch. The blizzard was ending. The rain had just begun. And that is how a simple act of kindness in a freezing alleyway changed the fate of the entire Chicago underworld. Elena Vance didn't just save a man that night. She saved a kingdom, and in return, she claimed a throne she never knew she wanted. From wiping tables at Sal's diner to commanding an army of 500 SUVs, she proved that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one with the gun. It's the one with nothing to lose and everything to protect. If you enjoyed this twist-filled Mafia romance, make sure to smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What did you think of Elena's choice at the end? Would you have taken the money and run, or stayed for the power? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next dramatic story. Thanks for watching.